Hi guys, Dr. Rachel Hippolyte here. So I want to talk about emotional trauma and how neurofeedback, neuro-optimal brain training can help with past emotional trauma that might be causing you problems today, even though the trauma may have been from your childhood or you may not even remember the trauma. So often emotional trauma, so first of all, what is emotional trauma? So emotional trauma is when the brain becomes overwhelmed with a situation. Now, an emotionally traumatic episode for one person may be very different from an emotionally traumatic episode for another person. So you can never ever judge anybody else's trauma. You know, a first day at school may be emotionally traumatic for one child and yet not for another. A car crash may be emotionally traumatic for one person, but if you're a racing car driver and you're used to crashing, then that may not be emotionally traumatic to that person. But what happens when the brain becomes emotionally traumatized with a situation? The brain becomes overwhelmed, and that episode doesn't get processed properly, and it doesn't get moved to the right part of the brain where the brain knows that that episode is now in the past. And what happens is it stays active and non-processed because of this overwhelm in the part of the brain and continues to think that this situation is still real. So even if logically you know it's in your past, subconsciously your brain is perceiving it as real. Now we know that the brain uses these automatic pathways, these automatic highways where it doesn't have to think about it. And that's where neurofeedback works. And these traumatic episodes would then lead to anxiety, depression, PTSD, CPTSD, and other mental health diagnoses. But all they are, we generally don't worry about the diagnosis. We worry about the fact that if you're getting these symptoms, we know that your brain isn't working at its optimum. Okay? Now, a lot of people that come to me already have a lot of therapy, especially talk therapy for that trauma, and yet the problem is still there. Now, talk therapy, we often use the logical, the conscious part of our brain to discuss it. And many of these clients have talked till they're blue in the face. They know exactly what the issue is, and yet they are still getting the symptoms and the physical trauma and triggers from the emotional problems that have happened in the past. Okay, so how does neurofeedback help with emotional trauma? So as we know, neurofeedback works on those automatic subconscious highways of the brain, where the brain is just doing it automatically, and it's constantly looking for these what we would call electrical turbulences or flutters when the brain is just about to go down a pathway. And then we're listening to music and we get an interrupt in the sound, which brings us back to the moment. So in the moment, the conscious brain then has to look at the pathway that it was just about to take. Now, the anxiety, depression, PTSD, complex PTSD, brain fog, poor focus are all very energy inefficient. So they're actually really hard work for the brain. And the brain will have an inherent ability to make life easy for it. So if it's given better information in that moment and it perceives that the pathway that it was just about to take, anxiety, depression, PTSD, CPTSD, which is hard work, is not the best pathway because it then relates it to what's happening in the moment, it will take a healthier pathway. And this way, without having to revisit that trauma, and we may not even know what that trauma is, the brain then processes this neurological tension that it's been just automatically doing because it's in the wrong part of the brain, because it's perceiving it as now, and it suddenly realizes that it's actually not relevant to the moment, to now. It realizes that in this moment, that pathway isn't relevant. And then we start building these new, healthier, more energy efficient pathways. And that's how these traumatic things that have happened in our past that are still causing mental health symptoms now are then processed to the correct part of the brain. They're put in the past, so the brain knows that it's past and not relevant to what is happening in your life now. And we see those emotional parts of the brain that are overactive in PTSD, anxiety, depression, then start to calm. And it's not that you forget what happens, you will remember it happens, but you won't have that emotional connection like it is real in this moment to it. And I see it every day. I've seen it in myself where I can see things that have happened in the past, but I have absolutely no emotional connection. I know it is now. Subconsciously as well as consciously, I now know it's in my past, and I have no emotional symptoms connected to it. So I hope that makes sense. What I love about neurofeedback with trauma is that you do not have to, one, revisit it, and also you do not have to know what that trauma is. There's no guesswork. Your brain knows exactly what it's doing, and it has an inherent ability to do the right thing when given the right information in this moment. So I hope that makes sense, guys. We work a lot with emotional trauma, but we don't need to talk about it. Often these clients have already talked about it enough. They know exactly what's going on. And so we just let that unconscious part of the brain, which is so powerful, do the job that it is supposed to do when it is given the right information. Okay, guys, I will chat to you soon.